Go ahead. Hello, everyone. We want to do an overview of the East Lyme Public Schools 23-24 proposed budget. This budget was presented to the Board of Education this past Monday on January 9th. Hopefully this gives you an overview of the information that we're looking at as it pertains to the needs of our students and staff rolling into next year. We start with our first slide. This is just a snapshot of the fact that we've had 2 budget workshops already this year with the Board of Ed, one on November 14th and one on December 15th. During these workshops, we utilize this time. We've done it over many previous years. Utilize the time to talk about needs, wants, and what our proposed budget numbers are looking like as it pertains to increases for the following year. This next slide is our mission statement. Everything that we do, everything that we decide as it pertains to our budget revolves around one statement, and that's this. This is our guiding principles and what we aspire to as it pertains to our students here in the East Lyme Public Schools. This is this year's East Lyme Board of Education goals. The Board of Ed has 4 goals this year. The reason we put this up here is, this budget being where it's at and the reduction in staff to get the overall proposed increase down is impacting these areas. Further reductions we feel beyond what we will show in just a minute for cuts would be significantly more impactful, and we don't want to see happen. We've got a lot of good things going across these 4 goals, and we're working hard to maintain an excellent level of service for our students. So these 4 goals are what we are working through this year, and they will carry over into next year, many of the components as well. Focus areas. The Board of Ed and administration, all of our staff, we have some core focus around these 4 areas. We're always looking to maintain appropriate class sizes. We'll share some class size information in just a minute. We've done a lot of great pathways work this school year, really expanding efforts with our community businesses, providing work opportunities for students out in the community and part of organizations, something we definitely want to continue as we roll into next year. Also providing a robust education for the whole child. We've always focused on that, and that's what we will continue to do. And providing ongoing intervention, and tiered support as it pertains to, all of our students here in East Lyme. So where we were when we worked through our budget workshops, we had first come to the first workshop with an overall rollover, an increase of 10.3% as it pertains to next year's budget. Since then, we have worked that number down 1.8 million to where we are proposing this budget at 6.97% for next year for an overall increase. That's the highest budget increase that I have presented in my 10 years as a superintendent, but there's some rationale reasons for why that increase is as high as it is, especially as it pertains to health insurance and inflation, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So a further breakdown of the preliminary reductions, salaries and benefits equated out to just over 1 million. And the other portion of that 1.8 was school and department reductions as we looked at every building, went through every line item and object code, and reduced another 716,000 for a total of just over 1.8 million in reductions to again bring it down to 6.97. This is a key slide as it pertains to really what makes up 98% of this overall increase rolling into next year. Salaries, we always have increases in salaries, averaging about 2.5% for contractual increases for all staff. But if you look at benefits and operating expenses, these two were really at the much higher end this year. We budgeted and this is based off of preliminary information from the state for our health insurance. They're recommending, and it's very early, but they're recommending an 8 to 12% increase for health insurance next year. We put it at the top end of 12%. That equates out to, and in addition to that 12% increase, we've had a number of staff members that have rolled over this year, going from single or 2-person to family plans, which is a higher cost, obviously. So all in, our benefits increase is 47.13% of the overall increase, or just over $1.7 million. Probably the highest it's been in a very long time. Operating expenses, we all are dealing with inflation. And you can see there that almost $400,000 in additional costs are due to increases in energy, electricity, natural gas, heating oil, and fuel. That's the biggest number we've seen. We've all been in the grocery store and we've all seen what inflation has been doing, and it's hit us pretty hard as well. So again, 98% of the overall increase in the budget is because of these three areas. So just a snapshot of, to show you some differences. If we, rather than a 12%, if we had a 6% increase in health insurance, rather than a 12%, it would save us $420,000. A 6% is really, where we should be or even less for a general increase. That would be, again, a $420,000 savings if it was lower. Assuming, a 7.5% increase, in inflation, you're looking at an additional $248,965. Impact on minimum wage as well. Minimum wage has gone up, 250,000 we equated out. So all in, these three numbers put together equates out to 917,000, almost 918,000. If we didn't have these increases, we would be presenting a 5.27% budget, not a 6.97. So, and that's generally around the area where we come in at each year. This slide we show each year, just a fixed expense slide, just shows, again, most of what we have in our operating budget are fixed expenses, salaries, benefits, contracts. There's a small sliver of supplies and software that makes up 3.07% of the budget. That we do have some flexibility, and there's where we had already made some reductions. And so most of a school operating budget is fixed expenses. We had 8.5 positions that were being funded this year out of the remaining ARP ESSER dollars that were provided to us from the state. Those dollars are done at the end of this year. We are maintaining 1.50 positions, and the rest are being reduced and are part of a full reduction of 18.5 staff members for next year. We'll kind of roll through, what and where those positions are in just a minute. And here they are, actually. So we're reducing, again, 18.5 staff members, and these are the core areas. We're trying to find, when we worked this through at our one of our last budget workshop, the least impact on students. Everything here is impactful, but we try to find what would be least impactful, to continued excellence in education for our kids. So a reduction in some staff for our high school coastal program, for elementary teachers, elementary technology teachers, one instructional coach, a tech coach. We have 2 of them in districts. We would maintain 1, 5 paraprofessionals across the district, and we would determine where those paras would come from later in the year as things shift and change with students and student needs. Library assistants, and then custodial part-time salaries, all equating to 18.5 FTE reductions. So enrollment, we mentioned 4 elementary teachers are declining. We're looking at for next year. Elementary enrollment pretty much stays the same with that reduction. So you can see to the far right, there shows 2 teachers at Nyack Center and 2 teachers at Flanders where the reductions would occur. There is one outlier, grade 3 at Nyack Center, where we would have average 22.5 students at that grade level. That's beyond the East Lyme the Board of Ed guidelines for enrollment. And that's something that the Board of Ed and administration will continue to watch and monitor as we move forward. Here are the guidelines, just a reference as you're looking, or if you want to look further at that enrollment slide. Elementary and is on the left, and then the verbiage for the middle school and high school on the right. Reduction impacts, as I mentioned, 18.5 staff is a lot of staff, and that has its impact. And if we go any deeper with that or additional cuts, there's going to be a greater significant impact and something that would be detrimental, I think, to our students. But culture and climate and academics, are impacted with a reduction of this nature, especially coming off of the pandemic and learning loss, for students. So we still have a lot of work to do as it pertains to continuing to improve growth and achievement for our kids. Additionally, we have almost 300 students that receive intervention services outside of special education and 504 services, across our district through a tiered service approach. those students are going to be impacted as well with decreases in staff and supports. Additionally, technology and social and emotional growth. Technology itself, every student has a device in their hands. A reduction, in technology positions and instructional delivery of technology is impactful. It remains challenging when we're trying to progress, and more and more devices are being used and computer programs and software in classrooms that we need to continue, and we'll continue to grow. But minusing or reducing staff has its impact on that, as well as social and emotional growth. The last piece here, student mental health and emotional needs continue to be on the rise. We've got a little data we want to show on that. So just this year, as of December, we've got crisis data. Middle schools had 61 incidents of crisis, and high schools had 72 incidents of crisis. Last year, there was just a note, there's 124 referrals to special education, 83 students qualified for special education services. We'll talk a little bit about special education with Mrs. Davis in just a second. But high numbers of crisis data, which warrants the need for staff and supports for those students. So just a recap, the impacts, concerns, ongoing needs. Any and all staff reductions are impactful. Again, we attempted to focus on the least impact, to our schools and programs. If it weren't for that health insurance cost and inflation, we would be looking at a percentage of 5.27 rather than a 6.97. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Spaziano, who is our assistant superintendent. She's going to talk a little bit about some summative academic data. Mrs. Spaziano.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. Yeah, so I wanted to highlight some of the findings that were presented to the board in October of this year, summarizing our summative academic assessments that were taken last spring. So what our data shows is that we, just like many other districts across the state and nation, are seeing our students experiencing learning loss as a result of the pandemic, and we're still trying to close achievement gaps associated with that. We are seeing really strong both academic and anecdotal data demonstrating that our student-centered coaching model is supporting student growth in key areas such as math and literacy. A bright spot in terms of our summative analysis is that East Lyme Public Schools does lead the DIRG in many of the assessment categories across all levels. And we still see patterns of assessment data in grade 5 that are areas of concerns, and we are really taking some time to look more closely at that. We have a special committee at the middle school right now looking at what changes can we make to capture additional instructional core time for math and literacy in grade 5 to support that transition from 4 to 5. We know that a focus on mental health, relationship building, and school connectedness will be important in supporting students' return as they return to the post-pandemic environment. And I know Mr. Newton had shared some mental health data associated with that previously. We've talked about the achievement gaps. As Mr. Newton mentioned, we have approximately 300 students accessing tiered intervention, helping to support to close those achievement gaps. And East Lyme Public Schools prides ourselves on the fact that we demonstrate significant strength in the area of science. Next slide, please. So, just to kind of give the audience a sort of big picture overview of what our historical summative assessment data looks like from 2017-18 to today, you can see over the course of the past few years, we have seen a dip in our academic data for ELA and math, and that's what I'm referring to when I refer to a learning loss. And so we're really working hard at closing those achievement gaps in math and literacy so that we can continue to demonstrate student growth on our summative assessments annually. Another interesting data point that we wanted to show was the relationship between what's called the accountability index and our per pupil expenditure. So the accountability index is a number that is given to each district by the state, and it's measured by multiple data points, 12 data points. And it's really an opportunity to look holistically at how well does the district service its students from a whole child perspective. So it looks at attendance data. It looks at summative assessment data. It also takes a look at access to art programming, our physical fitness assessment data. So really looking at a broad picture of our students, and the state provides us with a number associated with that. So you can see here in this table, East Lyme has received a score of 81.3. I'll mention that the data is from 2018-19 because this is the last time this accountability index data for all districts has been accessible to us. So we're comparing that to the 18-19 expenditure. Next slide, please. So to look at this accountability index versus per pupil expenditure more relationally in terms of the other districts that fall within our DIRG, you can see here that the blue lines indicate the average of the per pupil expenditure and the school accountability index, and it creates 4 quadrants on the graph. The bottom right-hand quadrant is the quadrant that districts would want to be in, and that's the quadrant that says students in that fall within, or districts that fall within that quadrant have schools that spent less per student, but have a higher accountability index. So we're performing well and spending less on our per pupil. And you can see East Lyme falls within that quadrant, along with some of our close friends within the DIRG. So essentially what this demonstrates to us is that, we're really efficient and effective with the use of our funds. And, we should be really proud about the fact that we offer strong academic and additional programming that supports the whole child. And we want to continue to be able to support those programs moving forward.
Thank you, Mrs. Spaziano. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Davis, who's going to talk a little bit further about some more special education information. Mrs. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Newton. Because special education is a large part of the activities on campus, we wanted to give you a snapshot of what's happening in the area of special education related to this budget. We started with this slide around the prevalence rates in East Lyme from 2017-18 to the 21-22 school year. You can see that the East Lyme percentage of prevalence is on the left, and to the right, the bar demonstrates the state of Connecticut prevalence rate. East Lyme has tended to trend a little bit below or right at the state levels, and for the first time in 21-22, we ticked up a little bit above the state trends. We hypothesize this is due to the impact of the pandemic on students' learning and the need for further supports for them to be successful in the classroom. Next slide. In this slide, you can see that we are comparing our students who are provided services outside of the district in what we call out-of-district placements with other districts in our DIRG. So how many students we send out of district each year is approximately 10, and they receive their educational services at private special education facilities. Those numbers are low compared to our DIRG partners, as you can see by this chart. The schools at the top have the most out-of-district students. The schools at the bottom have the least, and you can see that East Lyme is highlighted there with 10 out-of-district students, and you can compare that to the total enrollment of each district. So you can see that we're being very fiscally responsible and sending very few students to those approved private placements. Our out-of-district, that's important because out-of-district costs can be significant. The average tuition for a student out of district is approximately $96,000. In addition to that, we transport the student to and from their school placement for about an average cost of $28,000. When we keep kids in district, this cost is significantly less. So we are being as fiscally responsible as we can in making these determinations for students with high needs. There are other benefits to keeping students in the district. Besides just cost savings, they get programming with their peers, they get access to their community, and our student body in general is more diverse because students are encountering students who are different from them. So their peer group is a positive one. Next slide, please. I'll turn it back to Mr. Newton
Okay.
at this point.
Thank you, Mrs. Davis. Appreciate it. And thanks for sharing that information. Next, usually every year we share our per pupil expenditure across the DIRG. We're also going to share the next slide across Southeastern Connecticut, just a representation for the district reference group of where East Lyme falls as to how much we spend per student based off of, where our ranking is, across the state. And I think what's important to share here is, we are spending less than many other districts on each student, but we have a higher bang for the buck, where we have higher achievement scores and are providing a better education, I think, than many schools that are spending more money or less. So we're proud of where we stand with our per pupil expenditure and our ranking, and that's the DIRG there. The next one is just across Southeastern Connecticut, where we fall against other districts. And again, you'll see, some districts that do spend more, but we have higher achievement scores than many of those districts, and districts that are in a higher district reference group than us too. We are DIRG D, as you saw. A few more slides. Capital improvement plan. We always provide the Board of Ed with our capital improvement plan, and these items will be shared with the town. We have over 700,000 square feet of building space, and we have to continue to keep our buildings moving forward and make sure that we're keeping them up to speed and up to code. So Dr. Lund, who's our facilities director, will be continuing to share this information with the Board of Ed, and eventually we'll share it with the Board of Finance when we go down and present with them. But these are needed items going into next year. And lastly is our budget timeline. So give you a chance to kind of view that at your leisure. We will work through the rest of January and through February. The most important date probably is on here is the February 27th hearing, Board of Education hearing. That's when the Board of Ed will decide on the budget, and then it will be sent down to the town for their review and final meetings, with a referendum occurring in May. That is all. I want to thank you for your attention to these slides, and more information will be forthcoming at a later time, and we'll have additional meetings on the budget over the rest of January, as I mentioned, in February. Thank you very much.